There comes a point in every life where the soul grows weary of reaching outward for validation that never arrives. The heart becomes tired of knocking on doors that refuse to open. We have been taught, often since childhood, that love is something we must earn through obedience, sacrifice, or performance, and so many wander through life with an emptiness inside, constantly searching, constantly pleading, constantly asking, "Am I enough? Will you love me if I prove myself worthy?" But when we stop begging for love, something extraordinary happens. We step into the forgotten truth that love cannot be demanded, traded, or bartered. It must be free. It must arise naturally, like a spring bubbling from the earth. And when you cease your begging, you discover that love was never about convincing someone to see your worth. It was about reclaiming the worth that has always been yours. Let me take you through 5 profound shifts that occur when you stop pleading for love. When you beg for love, you unknowingly surrender the deepest part of yourself. You kneel before another and hand them the authority to decide whether you are worthy of affection, of presence, of recognition. In doing so, you shrink your soul into something conditional, fragile, dependent on moods and gestures that do not belong to you. This is not love, it is submission disguised as devotion. And the tragic irony is that the more you plead, the more you chase, the more you demand to be seen, the further away real love moves, for genuine love cannot thrive in an atmosphere of desperation. It must be born of freedom, not coercion. To beg for love is to forget that you are already whole. It is to live as though the mirror of another person's eyes is the only place you might find your reflection. But what happens when those eyes turn away? What happens when silence replaces affirmation? You are left empty, not because you lack love, but because you have abandoned your own authority over your life. Love, when it is reduced to a prize to be won or a wage to be earned, ceases to be love. It becomes control. It becomes a game in which one holds the power to give or withhold, while the other is left starving, waiting for crumbs. Think of the child who learns early that affection is not given freely, but only in exchange for achievement. The child runs faster, speaks louder, brings home grades like trophies, and yet, at night, feels unseen. They grow into an adult who still performs, who still bends themselves into shapes that might secure approval. Their entire being becomes a transaction. If I do this, will you love me? If I sacrifice that, will I finally be enough? Such a pattern weaves itself so deeply into the unconscious that the adult no longer recognizes that they are living on borrowed love, love rented from others at the cost of their own freedom. And yet, behind this tragic theater lies a forgotten truth. No amount of begging can awaken true affection, for authentic love cannot be bought, only given. The moment you cease begging, everything changes. A quiet but profound realization emerges. I am the source of my own worth. My value does not live in your hands, nor in your approval, nor in your fleeting recognition. I am not incomplete simply because another does not choose me. I exist in fullness regardless. This recognition is not arrogance, it is liberation. To stand in your own being and declare, "I am enough," is to reclaim the power that you once scattered at the feet of others. It is to remember that worth is intrinsic, not conditional, and when you reclaim that power, something curious happens to your relationships. Where once you entered them with desperation, now you enter with strength. Instead of bending yourself to fit the fragile mold of another's expectations, you bring your authentic self to the table. You no longer beg to be chosen because you have already chosen yourself, and paradoxically, this shift draws others closer. For strength, unlike begging, is magnetic. It calls forth respect. It creates space for genuine intimacy. It whispers, I do not need you to complete me, but I welcome you to walk beside me. Imagine the difference between two people entering a partnership. One clings, desperate for constant reassurance, fearful of abandonment, forever asking, "Do you love me? Am I enough?" The other stands rooted, self-assured, their love not a plea but a gift. The first drains the relationship, suffocating it with need. The second nourishes it because they come not as a beggar but as a giver, not as someone starved for affection, but as someone already full, sharing their fullness. Which of these two is more likely to inspire lasting love? It is always the one who has reclaimed their own power. But to reclaim this power requires courage. It means confronting the shadows within the old wounds that whisper, "You are not worthy unless someone loves you." It means walking through the loneliness that often follows when you stop chasing those who only offered you conditional affection. It may mean losing relationships that were never built on love, but on manipulation. This is painful, yes, but it is also purifying, for in the fire of this loss you discover the indestructible core of yourself, the part that cannot be abandoned because it was never dependent on another in the first place. There are countless stories of those who have lived this transformation. A woman who spent years shrinking herself to please a partner, only to one day realize she was begging for scraps, not love. She walked away, terrified, yet in time discovered that her solitude was not emptiness, but freedom. A man who built his entire identity around being needed, constantly proving his value to friends and lovers, until he finally asked himself, "What if I stopped performing? What if I simply was?" At first, he lost people who were addicted to his servitude, but soon he attracted those who saw him not for what he could do, but for who he was. In each case, the turning point was the same. The moment they stopped begging, they reclaimed their power. This is not only a personal truth, it is a universal law of the psyche. That which you chase with desperation flees. That which you embody with strength draws near. When you beg for love, you vibrate with scarcity, and scarcity repels abundance. But when you stand in your own worth, you radiate a quiet confidence, and confidence is irresistible. It is not loud, it does not demand, it does not plead, it simply exists, and in its presence others feel safe, drawn, awakened. The power you reclaim when you stop begging is not power over others, but power within yourself. It is not the power to control, but the power to be free. It is the power to say, "I will no longer diminish myself in order to be loved. I will no longer barter my authenticity for acceptance. I will no longer place my sense of self in the fragile hands of another. I will stand here, whole, unashamed, and alive." And when you do, love ceases to be a prize you chase. It becomes a natural outflow, something that arises without force. You will find that those who truly see you are drawn to you, not because you begged, but because you no longer needed to. And even if no one is there in a given moment, you are not empty. You are not unloved, for the love you once sought outwardly is now discovered within the love of self-respect, of authenticity, of presence. To stop begging for love is to awaken from a long and painful dream. It is to step into the truth that you were never lacking, never broken, never unworthy. You simply forgot your own power, and once you reclaim it, life changes in ways you could never imagine. The tragedy of the human heart is that we are often taught to wait for love, as though it must be granted by another before it can be felt within. We grow up believing that love is a gift bestowed by parents, friends, partners, or society, and if it does not arrive, we are left with an aching void. We wait to be chosen before we dare to choose ourselves. But this belief is one of the great illusions that keeps us bound in suffering. The truth is that love begins within, and it must first be cultivated in the soil of the self before it can grow outward into the world. Without that foundation, no amount of external affection will ever be enough, for the vessel will always leak what it has not sealed within. When you stop begging for love, when you decide that you will no longer hand over your worth for scraps of approval, something profound occurs. You finally turn inward. The gaze that was once fixed outward in restless longing begins to soften and shift. You ask yourself questions that may have been buried for years. What if I could befriend myself? What if I could stand in front of the mirror and treat the person I see not as an enemy to be fixed, but as a companion worthy of care? What if I could give myself the same compassion that I have so tirelessly chased in others? This turning inward is not easy, because often we discover how cruelly we have spoken to ourselves in the quiet moments when no one else could hear. We remember the voices of parents or teachers who made us feel inadequate, and we realize we adopted those voices as our own inner critic. Every failure became an accusation, every flaw a verdict, every weakness a reason to believe we were unworthy of love. To love yourself without permission is to confront these voices, to recognize that they are not truth but echoes of other people's wounds. It is to gently but firmly replace them with a voice that says, I am allowed to exist as I am. I do not need permission to belong to myself. Consider the story of someone who has been left by a partner, shattered by the silence of abandonment. The instinct at first is to beg, to prove, to chase, because they believe their worth has been stolen along with the relationship. But then comes a moment, sometimes born of exhaustion, sometimes of despair, when they choose a different path. Instead of chasing validation outside, they begin to nurture themselves within. They take long walks, they return to forgotten hobbies, they spend time reflecting on who they are apart from the person who left them. They begin to eat more mindfully, to rest, to learn new skills. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, their self-respect grows. They no longer walk through the world with the posture of a beggar, but with the quiet dignity of someone who knows they are enough. And curiously, others begin to notice this change. Their presence becomes magnetic, not because they demand attention, but because authenticity radiates from them, and authenticity is irresistible. To love yourself without permission is not arrogance, it is sanity. Arrogance is a mask, a loud proclamation that seeks to hide insecurity. Self-love, by contrast, is a quiet strength. It is not shouted but lived. It says, I am not superior to others, nor am I inferior. I am simply whole. If I do not cherish my own life, then no amount of external love will satisfy me. Every compliment will feel hollow, every gesture insufficient, every relationship unstable, because the foundation is cracked. But when I begin to cherish myself, external love no longer arrives as a remedy for emptiness, but as an enrichment of fullness. Psychological studies confirm what the ancients intuited. People with high levels of self-compassion report stronger relationships, healthier boundaries, and greater resilience in the face of rejection. Why? Because they are not using others as mirrors to prove their worth. They carry their worth within, and so rejection does not shatter them. They can grieve, they can feel pain, but they do not collapse into nothingness because they never abandon themselves. This is the key, to refuse to abandon yourself. Many of us have been experts at self-abandonment. We silence our needs to please others. We ignore our dreams to gain approval. We punish ourselves when we fall short, as though cruelty could ever lead to growth. And then we wonder why love feels so elusive, why it never fills us. It is because the first betrayal is always inward. When you stop abandoning yourself, you stop begging others to rescue you. You realize you were never in need of rescuing. You were in need of recognition, and that recognition begins within. There is a simple but profound shift that takes place when you practice self-love. You stop asking, "Who will love me?" and begin asking, "How can I love myself today?" This does not mean grand gestures or indulgence. It often means small, steady acts of care. It means resting when you are tired, speaking kindly to yourself when you fail, pursuing the dreams that call to you even if others do not understand. Over time, these small acts accumulate into a life that feels whole, not because others filled it, but because you learned to fill it yourself. Imagine a tree planted in poor soil, dependent on rain from outside, struggling to survive. Each drought threatens its existence. Now imagine the same tree discovering deep roots that reach a hidden underground spring. Suddenly, droughts no longer define it. It can flourish regardless of external conditions. This is the difference between a person who begs for love and a person who loves themselves without permission. The first is forever thirsty, forever dependent on external sources. The second has tapped into the wellspring within, and from that abundance they can offer shade and fruit to others without depletion. And here lies the paradox. The moment you no longer demand love from others, love begins to flow toward you more naturally. People are drawn to those who do not need them, but who choose them freely. They are drawn to the peace of someone who is at home in their own skin. And even if love does not come in the form you once craved, you no longer collapse. For you have discovered something more enduring than fleeting affection. You have discovered yourself. To love yourself without permission is to walk into freedom. It is to say, "I no longer wait to be chosen, because I have already chosen myself. I no longer beg for kindness, because I have learned to be kind to my own soul. I no longer fear abandonment, because I refuse to abandon myself." This is the foundation upon which all other loves are built. Without it, we are forever chasing shadows. With it, we are finally at home. When you beg for love, you create a silent contract that is written in imbalance. One person bends, shrinks, and gives endlessly, while the other withholds, controls, or doles out affection in small fragments. The relationship may appear alive on the surface, but beneath it lies a quiet starvation, a hunger that is never satisfied. The one who begs believes that by offering more of themselves, more sacrifice, more obedience, more devotion, they will finally receive the fullness of love. Yet the cruel paradox is that the more one pleads, the less the other is inclined to give. For love that is forced, bartered, or extracted under pressure is not love at all. It is power dressed in disguise. But something extraordinary happens when you stop pleading, when you turn away from the stage where you perform endlessly for another's approval, when you silence the voice that whispers, "Prove yourself, prove yourself." A shift occurs deep within your being. You begin to attract people who see you, not for your performances, not for the masks you wear, but for the essence of who you are. What changes is not the world itself, but the vibration you carry into it. Desperation, though unspoken, pushes people away, for it smells of emptiness, of a void that seeks to consume. Authenticity, on the other hand, draws people nearer, for it radiates a completeness that does not demand, but simply is. It is a truth echoed in both ancient wisdom and modern psychology. Studies of human relationships confirm that individuals with selfish, assuredness, and healthy boundaries are far more likely to build connections that last, because they do not depend on another to create their identity. They know themselves, and because they know themselves, they are able to see others clearly. Think of two magnets, one weak and scrambling for attachment, the other strong and steady. The weak magnet often repels, because its neediness creates a burden. But the strong magnet attracts, not by force, but by its natural field. In the same way, when you stop begging for love, you begin to draw toward you those whose presence complements rather than completes you. Consider a young man who has spent years trying to mold himself into whatever others wanted him to be. Around one group he is loud and reckless. Around another he is quiet and compliant, always scanning the room for cues about how to earn affection. He wonders why, despite his efforts, he feels invisible, why people drift in and out of his life without depth. One day, weary of the endless performance, he decides to stop pretending. He begins to speak honestly, even when it risks disapproval. He pursues interests that genuinely ignite him, even if they are not fashionable. At first, some people fall away, unsettled by his refusal to play the old roles. But then, slowly, he notices a change. New people enter his life who are drawn to his honesty, who find resonance in his unvarnished presence. These connections feel lighter, freer, and more nourishing, because they are rooted not in performance but in truth. This is the hidden beauty of refusing to grovel. You send out a silent message that others can sense even before words are spoken. The message is simple: I am whole. I do not need you to complete me. I welcome your companionship, but I do not beg for it. I can stand alone, and because I can stand alone, I can meet you as an equal. This message alters the very fabric of your relationships. It transforms them from dynamics of dependency into unions of mutual respect. Think of how exhausting it is to be around someone who constantly seeks reassurance, who cannot rest until they are affirmed again and again. Their need becomes a weight, a responsibility you never asked to carry. But think, too, of how peaceful it feels to be around someone who radiates quiet self-acceptance. They do not need to steal your energy, for they generate their own. In their presence, you feel lighter, safer, more authentic yourself. This is why those who no longer beg for love become so magnetic. They give others the gift of freedom simply by existing as free themselves. Yet this transformation does not come without cost. To stop begging for love often means to lose relationships that were never real to begin with. When you no longer play the role of the giver who endlessly sacrifices, those who depended on your groveling may depart. At first, this feels like loss, and it is tempting to believe you have made a mistake. But what you lose in quantity, you gain in quality. Shallow attachments give way to genuine connections. Those who remain and those who come anew are there because they see you, not because they need you to be smaller for them to feel larger. There is also a deeper spiritual truth at play. The psyche longs for balance. When one gives endlessly and the other withholds endlessly, the soul rebels. No matter how long such an arrangement is maintained, eventually something inside cries out, "This is not love, this is slavery." The act of no longer begging is a rebellion of the soul, a reclamation of balance. It is the psyche demanding to be seen not as a servant, but as an equal partner in the dance of relationship. And once that inner rebellion is honored, the external world rearranges itself. People of equal strength, equal honesty, equal willingness to be real, begin to appear as though drawn by some invisible law. The old self may wonder why this happens, but the answer is simple: like attracts like. Desperation attracts those who exploit desperation. Wholeness attracts those who live from wholeness. When you step out of the posture of begging, you change your signal to the world. You are no longer calling forth those who will drain you. You are calling forth those who will meet you. Imagine two flames. One flickers wildly, struggling for air, desperate for fuel. The other burns steadily, rooted in its own source. Place them together, and it is the steady flame that offers warmth, that invites others to gather around. People are drawn to that steady flame not because it cries out for attention, but because it shines without effort. When you cease to beg for love, you become that flame. You need not convince others to stay. You need not prove your worth. You need only burn steadily in your own truth, and those who value that warmth will remain. To attract genuine connections is to live in the paradox of love. The less you need to demand it, the more freely it flows toward you. When you no longer collapse into dependency, you open the door to companionship. When you no longer plead to be chosen, you invite others who choose you not out of pity or convenience, but out of true recognition. And in those connections, you discover a love that is not performance, not transaction, not control, but mutual presence. A love that says, I see you as you are, and that is enough. There is a certain kind of hunger that gnaws at the soul more painfully than any physical emptiness. The hunger for love that never comes, or that comes only in fragments. Many people live in this quiet starvation for years, bound to relationships that drain them rather than nourish them. They cling to what little affection they are given, mistaking crumbs for a feast, because the fear of being without love feels more terrifying than the reality of receiving almost none. And so they stay, begging, compromising, diminishing themselves day after day, believing that if they just give a little more, bend a little further, remain a little longer, then perhaps the tide will turn, and love will finally arrive in its fullness. But this is an illusion, a mirage that recedes the more you chase it. The truth is that cycles of toxic love are not sustained by the cruelty of the other alone. They are sustained by our own belief that we cannot survive without them. We hand over our dignity piece by piece, until one day we hardly recognize ourselves in the mirror, and yet all the while the heart whispers a quiet rebellion. This is not love. This is survival disguised as intimacy. The tragedy is that so many silence this inner voice out of fear, because to walk away feels like stepping into nothingness. But there comes a moment, sometimes sudden, sometimes slow, when the begging becomes unbearable. When you stop pleading, you draw a line in the sand and declare, I will not settle for half-hearted affection. I will not barter my soul for crumbs. This decision may feel like death at first, because it demands the ending of something you once thought you could not live without. But in truth, it is not death. It is the beginning of life. I once heard the story of a woman who endured years of neglect in her marriage. Day after day she pleaded silently to be noticed, to be heard, to be valued, but her efforts were met with indifference. She told herself that perhaps tomorrow it would change, that perhaps if she were more patient, more accommodating, more forgiving, love would finally awaken in the heart of her husband. But the years passed, and nothing changed. Then one morning, as if a veil had lifted, she said to herself, no more. I will not beg to be seen. She left, trembling with fear, unsure of who she was without the identity of being someone's wife. At first, the silence was terrifying, and she wondered if she had made a mistake. But within months she discovered a strength she never knew was hers. She laughed more, she stood taller, she felt the pulse of her own life flowing again. For the first time in decades, she felt alive, not because someone finally loved her, but because she finally loved herself enough to walk away. This story is not rare. It is archetypal. It lives in countless people who have endured the same struggle, who know the agony of mistaking chains for comfort. Breaking the cycle of toxic relationships does not mean rejecting love. It means refusing to accept a counterfeit version of it. It is saying, I would rather be alone in truth than together in illusion. It is the recognition that absence is less dangerous than betrayal, that solitude is less painful than being unseen while lying beside another in bed. To end such cycles is to confront the deep patterns written in the psyche. Many who beg for love were taught early that affection is conditional, that love must be earned through obedience or sacrifice. The child who grows up believing this often repeats the pattern in adulthood, drawn unconsciously to partners or friends who withhold affection in familiar ways. The mind calls it fate, but it is not fate. It is repetition, the echo of an unresolved wound. And every time the pattern repeats, the soul becomes more entangled, until the person believes this is simply how love is meant to be. But the soul does not settle for counterfeits forever. There is within each person a hidden strength, a voice that refuses to be silenced indefinitely. The act of walking away is not simply about leaving another. It is about breaking an ancient pattern within yourself. It is about telling the wounded child within, you no longer need to beg, you no longer need to prove. You are worthy of love as you are. This is why leaving a toxic relationship feels so terrifying, because you are not just leaving a person. You are leaving behind an entire identity, an entire way of surviving. And yet, in that leaving, you are born anew. Think of a bird who has lived in a cage for so long that the door, though open, feels like a threat. Freedom looks vast and dangerous compared to the familiar bars. The bird clings to the cage, not realizing that the very bars it clings to are the reason it cannot soar. So it is with us. The bars of toxic love feel safer than the open sky of self-respect, until one day the courage to fly becomes stronger than the fear of falling. Those who break free discover a startling truth. Solitude is not the enemy. Solitude becomes a teacher, a healer, a companion. In solitude you rediscover your own voice, the sound of your own laughter, the rhythm of your own heart. You realize that the love you begged for was not nourishment at all, but poison disguised as comfort. And once you taste freedom, you can never again mistake poison for food. This is the gift of drawing the line, of saying no more. It transforms not only your present, but your future. For when you refuse to settle for counterfeit love, you open space for genuine love to find you. You begin to attract relationships built on mutual respect rather than exploitation, on equality rather than control. You learn to walk away at the first sign of manipulation because you know the cost of staying, and you carry within you a new standard, a sacred boundary that says, I will not beg for love, because love that must be begged for is not love at all. The cycle of toxic relationships ends not when another changes, but when you change. It ends when you choose yourself over the illusion of being chosen. It ends when you understand that love which diminishes you is not love but fear wearing a mask. And when you refuse to wear that mask any longer, you step into the light of something greater than survival. You step into life itself. There is a moment, after the pleading has ceased, when love takes on a form you had forgotten was possible. For so long it had been entangled with fear. Fear of loss, fear of not being enough, fear of abandonment. It had been bound to performance, weighed down by endless attempts to earn what should have been freely given. In that posture of begging, love is never love. It is a transaction, a currency exchanged for obedience, silence, or sacrifice. But when you lay that posture down, when you stand finally in the dignity of your own being, something wondrous occurs. Love returns to its pure form. It becomes a gift again, flowing without demand, carrying no debt, owing no repayment. And this love does not appear only in the arms of another. It reveals itself everywhere, like sunlight breaking through clouds after a storm. You see it in the kindness of a stranger who holds open a door without expecting thanks. You feel it in the silent majesty of a tree that stands unshaken through the seasons, offering shade without asking for anything in return. You notice it in the rhythm of your own heartbeat. tirelessly sustaining you even when you forget to care for yourself. Love is there in art that stirs your soul, in music that brings tears to your eyes, in laughter shared with a friend, in the quiet warmth of morning light spilling across your room. To discover this is to awaken to a profound truth. Love is not scarce. It is not a possession to be hoarded, nor a prize to be earned. It is a state of being, a way of perceiving, a current that flows through all life when you are no longer blinded by desperation. Those who beg for love often live in the illusion of famine. They believe that affection is rare, that attention is limited, that to receive means to compete. But when begging ends, the famine dissolves. You see abundance everywhere. It was not that love was missing, but that your eyes were too fixated on one closed door to notice the windows flung wide open all around you. There was once a man who, after years of clinging to a loveless relationship, finally found the strength to let go. At first, he was haunted by loneliness, convinced that he had lost the only source of affection he would ever know. But as the months passed, he began to notice the small miracles around him, the way his dog greeted him at the door each evening as though he were the most important person in the world, the warmth in his sister's voice when she called to check on him, the sense of connection he felt in volunteering at a shelter where strangers treated him with respect and gratitude. For the first time in decades, he felt love not as a desperate hunger, but as a steady presence woven into the fabric of life. He realized that love had never left him. It had only been obscured by his fixation on receiving it from one unwilling source. The deepest freedom comes from this recognition. You stop grasping. You stop clinging to the idea that another person must complete you or validate you. You no longer beg for scraps because you have found the feast within yourself. And paradoxically, it is in this fullness that the most genuine connections emerge. When you are no longer trying to extract love, you are free to give it without fear. And in giving it freely, you discover it returning to you in unexpected ways, not because you demanded it, but because love naturally gravitates toward authenticity. This is why the poets and mystics throughout history have spoken of love as an essence, not a possession. They understood that love is the very nature of life itself. It is the thread that binds the stars in their courses and the cells in your body. It is not something you chase, but something you awaken to. When you stop begging for it from others, you begin to sense its presence everywhere. In the silence, in the stillness, in the ordinary moments that were always there but overlooked. And perhaps the most profound discovery is this: the love you thought you lacked was always within you. Beneath the layers of fear and doubt, beneath the wounds of rejection and the scars of abandonment, there remains an unshakable core of being that is love itself. To awaken to this is to recognize that you were never unworthy, never incomplete, never unloved. You had simply forgotten. The act of begging had clouded your vision, convincing you that love was something external, a scarce resource in the hands of others. But when you lay down that illusion, the truth shines through. Love was never outside of you. It is the essence of who you are. This realization does not mean you no longer desire companionship or intimacy. Rather, it transforms the desire itself. You no longer seek love to fill a void, but to share the fullness you already possess. You no longer fear being alone, because you understand that you are never truly alone. You are accompanied always by the great mystery of life, by the pulse of creation that flows through every breath you take. And from this place of abundance, your relationships become freer, lighter, more authentic. You are not chained by need, but invited by choice. To discover love in its purest form is to live with open eyes. It is to walk through the world with reverence, knowing that every moment carries the possibility of connection. It is to look into the face of another and see not a savior or a source of validation, but a fellow traveler equally whole, equally radiant. And when two such beings meet, love ceases to be a desperate bargain and becomes instead a dance, graceful, mutual, alive. In this way, the journey that began in the pain of begging ends in the wonder of discovery. What once felt like the loss of love becomes the gateway to its truest form. You no longer grasp at shadows, for you have found the light within, and in that light you realize that love is not given, not taken, not begged for, it simply is. It lives in you, around you, through you. It is the deepest truth of your being, waiting patiently for you to remember. So, what happens when you stop begging for love? You reclaim your power. You learn to cherish yourself. You attract authenticity. You break the chains of toxicity, and you discover love in its purest, most abundant form. The question, then, is not how do I make them love me? The question is, how do I begin to live as if love is already here? For once you stop begging, you will see the truth. You were never unlovable. You were simply looking for love in places that could not give it.